Hello and welcome to Digital Power China podcast, the podcast where we discuss how Europe can prevail in the growing geopolitics over technology and China's growing role in digital technology competition. Digital Power China, a consortium of engineers and political scientists, China experts, and economists, has brought out its new report where we look at reverse dependencies. For the last couple of weeks, months, maybe even years, Europe has been looking in how to reduce strategic dependencies on China to increase its resilience. But we flip the coin. We look at the question how we can remain indispensable to China, how China, despite its technological competence, power, innovation, can still need Europe as it does today. And with that, I would like to introduce to you my wonderful colleagues, all of which have been contributing to this new report that is just out now. So check it out if you're interested in that. Let me start with Rogier Creemers, my colleague from Leiden University. Rogier, a very simple but complicated question to start with. Why does China need us despite its innovation, despite its technological power? Why does China still want to cooperate with Europe?
Well, Tim, thank you for that question. There are a number of reasons for China to continue to want to maintain relationships in the technological field with Europe. Obviously, that's going to be very sector dependent, and that's something that we go into technology by technology and field by field in the report. But for instance, in the semiconductor field, obviously, I work in the Netherlands. In the semiconductor field, China simply cannot yet make its own advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment. And this is something that, for instance, it needs to buy from the Netherlands. In other areas, for instance, automotive, the European Union is very important as a market. Even after Brexit, the EU remains the largest unified consumer market in the world and the largest member of the World Trade Organization. And that means that for China to realize its ambition to move up the value chain, to become an economy with a higher level of income, therefore dependent on global demand for advanced Chinese-made products, access to the European market is essential. Obviously, that is a very sensitive matter, as we can see, for instance, in the discussions currently ongoing about electric vehicles and battery and propulsion technologies for electric vehicles. China's ambitions do trigger, shall we say, a certain amount of concern, a certain amount of caution, both for reasons of economic competitiveness and the survival of the European car makers, but also, for instance, where it comes to cyber and data security. A third reason that I think is important, we can never quite escape the long shadow of the United States, is that apart from what it wants to achieve with Europe itself, China, I think, sees Europe as a partner or an honest broker or a mediator in its relationship with the United States, which is getting increasingly fractious. And I'm not sure whether that hope is justified, but it certainly is an element of their engagement with Europe.
Thanks, Rogier. I would like to turn it to Mercedes. You're an economist working at Maastricht University, and you have done a really fascinating chapter where you discuss the role of the twin transition and sort of trace by a great patent analysis, sort of where Europe and China stand in terms of using digital technologies for the green transition. Could you help us sort of in what ways is China still needing Europeans in this field of twin transition, which is a policy priority for the European Union, but to some degree as well for the Chinese?
It's a very interesting question first. To begin with, our patent analysis suggests that innovation in most of twin transition technologies in China are still in a distance behind matching those in Europe. Just to give some numbers, we identified that only 5% of the applications are from are from China, while the joint share of European Union and the United Kingdom of regarding to twin transition patents are around 18%, slightly more than Japan, for example. Um, Even there are some disparities if we focus on Europe. Germany is the country with most patents, followed by France and the Netherlands, Italy, and Sweden. And on top of this, it's important to point it out that almost half of the patents application associated with digital and green transition are located in the US. But Europe still is in a strong position in the race towards green and digital patenting comparing to China. Also, what is very interesting is to what extent there are some relative technological specializations. And our patent analysis, we identify that Europe is technologically specialized in green capture technologies, green gas capture technologies, like the United Kingdom, and in buildings, in green technologies connected with buildings, while China has a more specialization towards green ICT. Also, we identified that share common areas in which both have technological specializations, such as energy, transport, and waste management, that is also very connected with circular economy technologies. Also, Europe, we identified that Europe has a technological superiority in combining green technology domains with artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, and robotics. And for combined digital and green patents, big data and green technologies related to transport and buildings are also common areas in which the specialization, there is a technological specialization for both China and the European Union. We believe that in the areas where Europe has a technological advantage, it could be or it could represent an opportunity to shape technological development in China. Given these results, it might be interesting. It might be the interest of the European Union that China use these digital green technologies not only from an European perspective but also from a global environmental perspective, thinking also in more in sustainability, more in global terms rather than not only the European borders. We believe that the acceleration of the green transition requires ambitious public policies are needed in both regions to drive innovation, incentivize private sector involvement, and ensure that regulatory frameworks support new technology adoption and diffusion. In addition, and just to finish, Europe can have a key role in cybersecurity in energy systems. And this will require a lot of collaboration efforts among both regions.
Thanks, Mercedes. I think what this case really interestingly shows is that, of course, we may be competing, but there are obviously also policy priorities that overlap. The green transition being a very crucial aspect for both sides. Valentin, you have been looking into the issue of facial recognition. By way of introduction, Valentin Weber is a senior research fellow with the German Council on Foreign Relations, and you've been penning a very interesting chapter on facial recognition technology. There's less of an overlap of interest between both sides. There are security aspects, there's value differences. Could you walk us a bit through that case and sort of explain to us what do we Europeans have that the Chinese could be interested in the future, and what are the actual risks if we cooperate too closely with the Chinese?
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, so of course, it would be great to have leverage over China in different technological fields. For face recognition, however, the risks are too great. And I think there's two major risks. One is quite obvious. It's the abuse of those technologies, of diffusing to China, and they then be used to crack down on human rights. And face recognition is usually bought by the police and the military. They use it to identify key people, to punish people who have signed petitions. One could make the argument of saying, okay, we're going to sign technologies to Guangdong, but not to Xinjiang. But we know that all major police stations in the country are connected to national databases, which are used to also crack down on fundamental human rights. And so what we have seen in the previous years is that Europe did sell technology, facial recognition technologies and CCTV cameras to China. The most prominent example was Axis, which is a Swedish company which sold its cameras even to a police station that then equipped the Tiananmen Square in Beijing. And so we see that there were previously entanglements that has really been reduced because of a government procurement law that was passed in China, and that has been now enforced more strictly. And this law requires really for Chinese police departments and the military to substitute any international equipment and substitute it with domestic ones. But in the future, we really see that Europe might have capabilities there emerging that China could be interested to further its facial recognition capabilities. And one of those is quantum annealing. And quantum annealing really is a technology that is used to make computing faster. And in the facial recognition case, that means that the computers can match faces faster. And with the vast amount of data that China collects every day through its cameras, this would be of really great interest. And Europe is really a leader in this quantum annealing technology. So we need to make sure that that technology does not diffuse to China, that we closely track any diffusion, and also are aware of any research collaborations that could also mean that technological innovation could be ending up in China and hurting human rights there.
Thanks, Valentin. I mean, we have now heard one case where it's very clear that the policy priorities overlap, where there's good reason to collaborate. The facial recognition one case being an example of where the risks are very obvious. Let's turn to sort of a more a more complex or difficult case to consider. And let's turn it to Angela Stanzel, who's working for the German Institute for Security and International Affairs. And you've been looking into the case of space technology. And help us a bit understand here as well, sort of to what extent is it good if we collaborate with the Chinese? What do we gain from that? Or what are the inherent risks? Because what I can see is that we have essentially been more decoupling as the West, not just Europe, US and Europe, from China due to security concerns. But how do you assess that?
Thank you very much, Tim. So yes, that's right. What we have been seeing is an increasing decoupling from China's space program or the Chinese space industry. As compared to the past, there's very, very few cooperation left between the EU and China in this area. But also, I think rightfully so, because we could see over the past years that indeed China copied a lot of European technologies to use for its space program. And given also in other areas the risks we see in transferring dual-use technologies, and we already heard about the concerns by the US in other areas, such as the semiconductors, I think we had every reason to mostly follow the US on this path of decoupling. And finally, also because China's space program or China's space industry is very, very much linked to its military goals. So because of the military nature of space technologies, I think the decoupling path was somewhat wise, you could say. But on the other hand, the EU has not been strategic enough because it solely ended up relying on the US when it comes to developing any kind of ambitions in space. So now we have the situation today that neither side, neither the EU nor China, are dependent on each other. The Chinese space program is relatively autonomous, while as the EU increasingly is relying on the US to be an actor in this area. So we are not at all indispensable to China. But the train has not left the station yet. It's not too late, as we show in our chapter in the Digital Power China report. We show that China is still eager to cooperate with the EU, unless, at least for now. because it has an interest to advance its very, very ambitious lunar program. In particular, its International Lunar Space Research Station, which it's going to build on the moon. And cooperating with the EU could improve China's performance. It could ensure the robustness of its lunar program. And in particular, it could support its commercialization, because China has been relying almost to 90% on its state-owned enterprise, but it wishes to transfer more of the innovation capacity to its private industry. So here, I think the EU is still very attractive to China, and we have identified this niche technology area of communications and navigation systems on the moon, where Europe has been advancing to develop something as like a lunar infrastructure in communications, you could say. So I think strategic entanglement with China would be desirable for Europe. It would, however, require, of course, close coordination with the US. In particular, looking at that, because we're looking at tightening inbound and outbound investment screening and so on. But it would, in particular, also require for the EU to make very large strategic and targeted investments in these niche technology areas. And more of that you can read in the report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. I would like to finally bring in my colleague Liesbet van der Perre. She is a professor at KU Leuven. And we have been together penning the chapter where we look into 5G technology, 5G and future wireless networks. That also applies to 5G advanced and 6G, looking a bit into the question of energy saving technologies, where Europe places a great emphasis and policy priority, while China to some extent as well, but less so. So that provides, as we argue in the chapter, sort of an opportunity for us. Now, Lisbeth, explain to us a bit why this matters, maybe, because we know Huawei, ZTE are technology leaders in China. Yes, we have Ericsson and Nokia in Europe, but that sort of at first seems to be like both sides have very strong leaders. It seems that technological leaders, it seems that Europeans are squeezed out of the Chinese market, Chinese vendors increasingly squeezed out of European markets, but at least there's probably a competition over third markets too. In what ways are the advantages that we discuss in the chapter helping European suppliers in the future, or have at least the potential to help us?
I think there is a number of hopefully things where this can help. I think the first one is if we are leading in energy consumption solutions, and we also have a possibility to get to these things into standards or enablers for that in standards, not the solutions, but enablers, that we might get a patent benefit, which is then a benefit that should be everywhere in the world. So I think that's one thing. Coming back to the IP story, if we make this a priority in Europe, then we could have a priority in all the markets if it comes to innovation and basic patents. Of course, if it comes about products and selling products, then we hope that having things that consume much less energy could be very interesting for certain areas in the world, and not only for ecological reasons, but hopefully also for economic reasons, because that is something which maybe is a good thing about the energy crisis, is that finally there comes a cost with energy that becomes more important, and that might give us a competitive also economic advantage for third parties, third countries, definitely in places where it's difficult to get the energy, where it becomes quite expensive, where there are shortages, that saving, but then considerably, we should not talk percentages, but huge amounts, can help in giving us a benefit, a competitive advantage, that in terms of specifically ecological benefits, of course, but then the question is, do other places find that as important as we do in Europe? Some people will say, and I think Ericsson made the claim very recently, Giving us more regulations in Europe will only make things worse from an economics perspective. But if the innovation is there, that we can combine the economic and ecological benefits, and if we creatively think out of the box for that, I think we might be leading and showing that both can go together and that we actually can build things that are lower cost, that consume less, and that hence are in many countries much more interesting to deploy. So I hope it brings us an advantage on a technological level, economic level, and ecological level for third countries, but also we need to keep our position regarding patents and innovation. And maybe that is also a place where it is important that we bring this innovation there, where I think we have the culture, we have this habit, and we can bring something where it's more into our R&D groups and labs to take this into account or to put this as an important factor, a criterion to optimize for.
Thanks. Yet another case, I think, just as Mercedes was also explaining before, where actually sustainability could be a competitive advantage to Europe. Now, Digital Power China has sort of one iron rule, and that is that we also provide policy recommendations to Europe. Now, I want to keep this really brief and ask each of you to name one policy priority that the European Union should implement. And hopefully you could do this in 1 minute each if possible. And maybe I start with you, Rogier, and then we go to other colleagues in this on this panel.
Well, certainly building on what Liesbet was just saying, I think Europe should just very clearly understand in all of the sectors that we deal with in the report the challenge that it's up against. And particularly in very many cases, what is occurring in China isn't necessarily in our interest, but it is being done extremely competently. So it sounds perhaps a little bit controversial, but we really should take very seriously what is going on in China. And I noticed that too often we still sort of look a little bit down on the Chinese, or we think that because it's an authoritarian state, they cannot be technologically capable or competent. And I think that is a misjudgment. So across the board, we need to build a lot more knowledge about what's going on in China, connect technological, industrial, policy insights, economic, commercial insights, and get a far better situational awareness of where we find ourselves in this rapidly shifting global economic structure.
Excellent. Liesbet, maybe you continue. What is your take? What should Europeans do?
Well, I think I agree with Rogier. We have to be very careful because if you impose policies that might become an obstacle in Europe, which is not there in China, we are in trouble. While I'm absolutely convinced that we should go for much better energy performance solutions, we should be very careful in making the hurdles and the number of regulations and the administration that European companies should comply with higher. I think we should make it clear that it has to be a technological and an economic advantage, and avoid that there are too many regulations that might be a hinder for European companies to be successful in this market. And then it's going to be the second one, Tim, but I cannot be silent about it. I know I have been saying it several times. There is a problem of educating people and talent. And there I think Europe has been a little bit too naive in the sense that we open a lot of programs. There is a lot of R&D money invested. But then if you look at the PhD students, how many Europeans, at least in my field, are still involved? And what can we do about that? Can we be a bit more restrictive or careful in if we have European projects or calls even that ask that people have not been in the country, so that really invites non-European mostly, is this okay? I think that is a problem. We want to have more talented people that we educate, but in practice I think we do educate a lot of non-Europeans in our programs. What can we do about that? And couldn't there be policies in two directions, making it more attractive for Europeans and be a bit more careful in instruments that kind of give the advantage to non-Europeans? I don't want to be a racist. It's just about not being naive, I think.
Thanks, Liesbet. That tapping very much into this discussion of knowledge security. Angela, maybe over to you.
Thank you. So I'll be very straightforward. I believe, or what we suggest in our chapter, is also that the EU, meaning the European Space Agency, and also the relevant member states, should focus much more on investing more strategically in space technologies where we have already an advantage. So, meaning niche areas such as the proposed navigation and communication system on the moon, which then would translate into developing a unique set of capabilities for the EU in the space industry, and which would hopefully then also result in a higher degree of leverage over China. We also believe that in general, it would make the EU much more attractive to other countries and present the EU also as an alternative partner in the area of space, given that at the moment, the countries that would like to play a role in being an actor on the moon or in space in general, basically only have the choice between the US and China.
Thanks, Angela. And Mercedes, maybe you share your policy take with us.
Well, yes, in what concerns green and digital technologies, I think that the key aspect is to strengthen those areas in which we have identified clear technological specializations and reconfigure at some point the way in Europe in which European Union is collaborating with China in these areas and strengthen their capacities and yes, basically we believe that it is required an harmonization of the digital and green standards and regulations in interest of both European Union and China. So that requires a lot of alliance, and that's why I was saying like maybe it's require a different or thinking of a different way in which both regions interplay in this race towards sustainability and digitalization. Especially, we know that Europe has an advantage in terms of or more expertise in what is regulation and institutions. Maybe it's important to start thinking of showing digital and green standards in which both collaborate at some point. So that we think that is the main has to be the main goal. Thinking that both are really important or are major global actors towards the digitalization and sustainability. So the way is that.
Excellent. And the final word to Valentin. What is your recommendation for us?
Thank you, Tim. So in the chapter we highlighted surveillance that Europe was once complicit in empowering China's surveillance state when it was still had capabilities that China didn't. This has changed quite a lot, but it is gaining niche. It is gaining a foothold in niche areas, which could be of use to fish recognition capabilities. Again, we argue that Europe should double down on fostering these key capabilities, such as in quantum annealing, which can be used in a wide variety of industries, and make sure that then this advantage, which is also in the Europe's hands, let's say, is not then misused in China. So we say that export controls need to be made enforced properly, because there are export controls, but they are not enforced that properly, and that we really make sure that this technology is being used for good, that Europe stays a leader, but it doesn't happen the same what happened years ago. That this fosters also the crackdown on people expressing their viewpoints.
Thank you so much, Valentin, and thank you to the entire panel. If you found this as fascinating as I did, please don't hesitate to download the full report that is available on several websites of the institutions that have been contributing. Also here on YouTube, in the info box, you'll also find a link to this report, Reverse Dependencies from Digital Power China. And we look forward to your questions, your interests, your comments. Thank you for listening today. Thanks to the panel, and goodbye.